Tonight, we travel back to the early 18th century, a time when merchant ships carried fortunes across the Atlantic, a time when empires competed for wealth and influence, and a time when pirates emerged from the edges of the known world to challenge them all. Among the many ships that sailed these waters, one stood apart, a vessel feared by merchants, respected by pirates, and forever linked to one of history's most famous pirate captains. Its name was Queen Anne's Revenge. Under the command of Blackbeard, the ship became a floating fortress, a powerful vessel capable of controlling shipping lanes, blockading ports, and spreading fear wherever its dark reputation traveled. Yet before it became a pirate flagship, it lived a very different life. It crossed oceans under another flag. It served another purpose, and its journey reflects both the opportunities and tragedies of the Atlantic world during the Golden Age of Piracy. Tonight, we'll follow the ship's complete story, from its construction in Europe to its capture by Blackbeard, from its rise as the most feared pirate ship in the Caribbean to its sudden and mysterious end. And we'll discover how a single vessel helped create one of the greatest pirate legends in history. So settle comfortably, listen to the gentle rhythm of waves against a wooden hull, and join me as we uncover the remarkable story of Queen Anne's Revenge, Blackbeard's floating fortress. And before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the Forgotten Files, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Every story, every memory, and every place matters. And together we keep history alive. Now let's begin. Part 1. A French Ship is Born. As we begin our journey into the story of Queen Anne's Revenge and travel back to the opening years of the 18th century, it is important to remember that the vessel later feared throughout the Atlantic did not begin its life as a pirate ship. Before it became associated with Blackbeard, before merchants whispered its name in distant ports, and before it entered maritime legend, it was simply a newly built vessel entering a rapidly changing world. Every famous ship begins as timber, iron, canvas, and human effort. Long before stories and reputations attach themselves to a vessel, shipbuilders, craftsmen, and sailors shape its physical existence. To understand Queen Anne's Revenge, we must first understand the environment that produced it. We must return to the shipyards of Europe during a period when oceans connected continents, trade routes expanded across the globe, and maritime power shaped the fortunes of nations. Imagine a busy French port during the late 17th and early 18th centuries. The harbor is alive with activity. Merchant vessels arrive carrying goods from distant lands. Workers unload cargo onto crowded docks. Shipbuilders labor beside partially completed hulls. The smell of timber, tar, salt water, and canvas fills the air. Such ports function as gateways between worlds. Information, wealth, and people move constantly through these maritime centers. Governments recognize the strategic importance of shipping because control of trade often translates into political and economic influence. Within this environment, shipbuilding becomes one of the most important industries of the age. Imagine the process of constructing a large sailing vessel. The undertaking requires extensive planning and considerable resources. Skilled craftsmen select timber carefully, knowing that the quality of the wood will influence the ship's strength and longevity. Massive wooden frames rise gradually from the shipyard floor. Each beam is shaped and positioned according to detailed plans developed through generations of maritime experience. Shipbuilding combines practical engineering with accumulated knowledge. Every successful vessel represents centuries of experimentation refined into working designs. Imagine workers shaping oak timbers intended to form the backbone of a new ship. These trees may have grown for decades before reaching the shipyard. Their transformation into a vessel capable of crossing oceans illustrates the remarkable relationship between natural resources and human ambition. The Atlantic world of the early 18th century depends heavily upon ships. Oceans connect markets, colonies, and empires. Without reliable vessels, long-distance trade becomes impossible. Governments therefore invest heavily in maritime infrastructure. Merchants finance new construction. Shipyards expand to meet growing demand. Imagine the vessel that would eventually become Queen Anne's Revenge taking shape piece by piece. At this stage, it carries no legendary identity. It is simply another ship being built for commercial purposes. Yet even now, certain characteristics distinguish it from smaller vessels. It is designed for long voyages. Its hull possesses considerable carrying capacity. Its structure reflects the demands of transatlantic travel. Such ships must survive rough weather, transport valuable cargo, and operate efficiently across vast distances. Practical considerations guide every aspect of the design. Imagine the Atlantic world into which this ship is born. Europe, Africa, and the Americas are increasingly connected through maritime networks. Merchant companies seek profits through expanding trade. Colonial settlements depend upon supplies arriving by sea. Governments compete for influence across distant regions. Ships function as the essential technology enabling these interactions. They carry not only goods but also ideas, information, and people. The vessel under construction will soon become part of this larger system. Imagine the launch of a newly completed ship. Crowds gather along the waterfront. Workers make final preparations. The vessel slides into the water for the first time, transitioning from an object under construction to an active participant in maritime life. Such moments often carry symbolic significance. A ship's future remains unknown. Successes and failures lie ahead. Voyages have not yet begun. Yet the launch represents possibility. The vessel enters a world filled with opportunities and risks. Imagine sailors examining the newly launched ship. Experienced mariners assess its design, stability, and potential performance. Ships quickly develop reputations among those familiar with maritime life. Certain vessels are admired for speed, others for durability, still others for cargo capacity. These reputations emerge gradually through experience rather than legend. At this stage, Queen Anne's Revenge possesses no famous history. It must earn whatever reputation it eventually acquires. Imagine the economic forces shaping maritime activity during this era. European powers pursue wealth through global trade networks. Valuable goods move between continents in increasing quantities. Sugar, tobacco, textiles, metals, and countless other commodities travel aboard ships crossing the Atlantic. Maritime commerce becomes central to national prosperity. Every successful voyage contributes to larger systems of exchange. The vessel destined to become Queen Anne's Revenge is constructed specifically to participate in this world. Imagine daily life aboard a newly commissioned merchant vessel. Crew members learn routines. Officers establish procedures. The ship begins accumulating experiences. Ports are visited. Cargo is transported. Storms are encountered. Relationships develop among those living and working aboard. Ships become communities as much as machines. Their histories consist not only of famous events but also of ordinary voyages connecting distant places. Imagine the uncertainty accompanying every departure from port. Sailing remains dependent upon weather, navigation, and countless variables beyond human control. Mariners accept these realities as part of life. Oceans offer opportunities but never guarantees. Every voyage contains elements of risk. The ship's future therefore remains open. No one watching it depart can predict its eventual transformation into one of the most famous pirate vessels in history. Imagine standing upon the dock as the newly launched ship disappears toward the horizon. The sails catch favorable winds. The vessel moves steadily into the Atlantic world that created it. At this moment, there is no Blackbeard, no pirate legend, no floating fortress. There is only a French merchant ship beginning its career within an interconnected maritime system. Yet history often unfolds in unexpected ways. The same vessel built for commerce will eventually become associated with piracy. The ship intended to serve one purpose will acquire another entirely. And the ordinary beginnings we have explored tonight will become the foundation for an extraordinary story still remembered centuries later. As the newly built French vessel begins its early career and enters the busy maritime networks of the Atlantic world, it becomes part of a historical era defined by movement, ambition, and transformation. To modern observers, oceans often appear as vast natural spaces separating continents. During the early 18th century, however, the Atlantic functioned increasingly as a corridor connecting distant regions. Ships crossed these waters continuously. Merchants sought profits. Governments pursued influence. Colonists established settlements. Sailors traveled between worlds. The vessel that would eventually become Queen Anne's Revenge emerges within this dynamic environment. Understanding its early years requires understanding the broader maritime system surrounding it. Ships do not exist in isolation. They operate within networks shaped by economics, politics, geography, and human decisions. Imagine the Atlantic Ocean during this period. Trade routes link European ports with colonies in the Americas and commercial centers along the African coast. Seasonal winds influence navigation. Certain passages become heavily traveled because they offer efficient access to valuable markets. Sailors accumulate extensive knowledge about currents, weather patterns, and navigational challenges. Maritime expertise develops through experience passed between generations. The ship destined for future fame begins life within this world of practical knowledge and routine commerce. Imagine the crew members who serve aboard the vessel during its early voyages. Most will never become famous. Historical records often preserve the names of captains and owners while ordinary sailors remain largely anonymous. Yet these individuals perform essential work. They handle sails, maintain equipment, navigate difficult conditions, and keep the ship functioning. Maritime life demands cooperation. Success depends upon collective effort rather than individual reputation. The future Queen Anne's Revenge owes its existence not only to famous figures, but also to countless workers whose contributions rarely appear in legends. Imagine a typical morning aboard the ship during one of its early voyages. Sailors wake before sunrise. Duties begin immediately. Sails require adjustment according to changing winds. Equipment must be inspected. Navigation observations are recorded. Meals are prepared using limited supplies. Life at sea follows routines shaped by necessity. Popular pirate stories often emphasize dramatic adventures, but real maritime existence consists largely of continuous labor. Ships survive because crews perform countless ordinary tasks successfully. Imagine the vessel crossing the Atlantic for the first time. The journey may last weeks depending upon weather and destination. During this period, the ship becomes a self-contained community isolated from land. Sailors adapt to rhythms determined by the sea. Weather influences daily activities. Storms demand additional effort. Calm conditions create different challenges. The ocean remains both pathway and environment. Every voyage teaches lessons about survival and cooperation. Imagine the economic motivations driving these journeys. Merchant vessels exist because trade promises profits. Investors finance voyages expecting returns. Cargo represents opportunity. Ports compete for commercial activity. Maritime commerce shapes entire societies. The ship participates in these systems long before acquiring any connection to piracy. Its original purpose reflects the priorities of governments, merchants, and economic networks expanding across the Atlantic world. Imagine the ports visited during these early years. Each possesses distinct characteristics. Some function as major commercial centers bustling with activity. Others serve specialized regional roles. Yet all depend upon shipping. Ships deliver goods, information, and people. Harbors become places where different cultures and experiences intersect. The future Queen Anne's Revenge moves through this interconnected environment, accumulating history gradually through repeated voyages. Imagine the technological sophistication required for long-distance sailing. Modern transportation often feels predictable because advanced systems support navigation and communication. Early 18th century mariners operate under different conditions. They rely upon charts, instruments, observations, and experience. Determining position at sea remains challenging. Weather forecasts do not exist in modern forms. Decisions must often be made with incomplete information. Successful voyages therefore reflect considerable skill. The ship's survival during these years demonstrates the competence of those responsible for operating it. Imagine the role of maritime competition within the Atlantic world. European powers frequently pursue overlapping interests. Trade routes become strategic assets. Ports gain importance because they support commercial activity. Ships therefore occupy positions within larger political and economic systems. The vessel that will eventually become Queen Anne's Revenge begins life serving these broader objectives. Its voyages contribute to networks extending across continents. Imagine sailors gathering on deck during quiet evenings after daily work is completed. Conversations may turn toward previous voyages, distant ports, and future opportunities. Stories circulate naturally within maritime communities. Information travels through personal experience and shared narratives. Long before the ship becomes famous, it participates in this culture of storytelling. Mariners exchange observations about weather, navigation, commerce, and unusual events. Such traditions help preserve knowledge while strengthening community bonds. Imagine the gradual accumulation of wear and experience affecting the vessel. Every voyage leaves traces. Storms strain rigging. Saltwater influences materials. Repairs become necessary. Ships change over time as they adapt to practical demands. The future Queen Anne's Revenge is no exception. Its physical structure evolves through use. Maritime history often focuses upon dramatic moments, yet long careers are built from countless smaller experiences. Imagine standing upon the deck as the ship sails through open water beneath a sky filled with stars. The horizon stretches endlessly in every direction. At such moments, the vessel appears ordinary. It serves commercial purposes. It follows established routes. Nothing suggests the extraordinary transformation awaiting it. Yet history frequently develops through unexpected intersections. A ship built for one purpose may find itself serving another. Circumstances change. New opportunities emerge. Individuals make decisions altering futures dramatically. The vessel's story remains unfinished. Imagine the Atlantic world continuing to evolve around it. Trade expands. Competition intensifies. Maritime networks grow increasingly complex. Somewhere within this changing environment, events are unfolding that will eventually bring the ship into contact with one of history's most famous pirates. Neither the crew nor the vessel can anticipate what lies ahead. For now, the ship remains a French merchant vessel pursuing ordinary objectives within an extraordinary age. Yet the foundations of its future legend are already being laid. Each voyage carries it closer to the moment when its identity will change forever, transforming an ordinary commercial ship into the floating fortress remembered as Queen Anne's Revenge. Part 2: The Slave Trade Voyage. As the ship continues its career within the commercial networks of the Atlantic world and carries out voyages that connect Europe, Africa, and the Americas, we gain a clearer understanding of how deeply maritime history is intertwined with larger historical systems. Ships often appear in popular imagination as independent actors crossing open oceans in pursuit of adventure or profit. In reality, vessels operate within structures created by governments, merchants, investors, and economic institutions. The future Queen Anne's Revenge is no exception. During these early years, its identity remains defined not by piracy but by participation in established patterns of Atlantic commerce. Understanding this period helps reveal how dramatically the ship's purpose will later change. Before it became a symbol of rebellion against authority, it functioned as part of the very systems that powerful institutions work to maintain. Imagine the Atlantic world as a vast network rather than a collection of separate regions. European ports, African coastal trading centers, Caribbean colonies, and settlements in the Americas are linked through maritime routes carrying goods, information, and people. Ships serve as the physical connections making these relationships possible. Every voyage contributes to larger patterns. Individual sailors may focus on immediate responsibilities, yet their work supports systems extending across oceans. The vessel destined to become Queen Anne's Revenge participates in these networks repeatedly, moving through routes familiar to countless mariners of the age. Imagine a typical departure from port. Supplies are loaded carefully because long voyages require careful planning. Water, food, spare equipment, and navigational instruments must all be accounted for. Captains review routes and expected weather patterns. Investors anticipate financial returns. Crew members prepare for weeks or months away from land. Such scenes occur regularly throughout the Atlantic world. The future Queen Anne's Revenge begins as one participant among many. Nothing yet distinguishes it dramatically from other commercial vessels operating during the same period. Imagine the rhythm of life at sea during these voyages. Days are structured by work. Sails require adjustment. The ship's condition must be monitored constantly. Navigational observations help determine position. Weather remains a constant concern. Maritime life demands patience because progress often depends upon forces beyond human control. Winds may accelerate travel or delay it significantly. Storms can alter plans unexpectedly. Sailors learn to adapt because flexibility is essential for survival. The crew serving aboard the future Queen Anne's Revenge experiences these realities repeatedly. Imagine the contrast between modern transportation and early 18th century shipping. Today, journeys often follow predictable schedules supported by advanced technology. During this era, uncertainty remains unavoidable. Communication across oceans is impossible once a ship leaves port. Decisions must be made using available information and accumulated experience. Every voyage contains unknowns. This uncertainty shapes maritime culture profoundly. Sailors develop habits of observation, caution, and resilience because the environment demands them. Imagine the broader economic motivations driving Atlantic commerce. European demand for colonial products continues growing. Agricultural goods, manufactured items, and various forms of raw materials move between continents in increasing quantities. Governments support commercial expansion because trade generates revenue and strengthens national influence. Investors finance voyages expecting profits. Ships become tools serving these objectives. The future Queen Anne's Revenge exists within this framework. Its owners evaluate success primarily through commercial outcomes rather than historical significance. Imagine the human dimensions often hidden behind economic language. Commercial records may emphasize cargo and profit, yet every voyage involves people whose experiences vary dramatically depending upon their position within the system. Sailors perform demanding work under challenging conditions. Merchants pursue opportunities shaped by market forces. Others experience the consequences of institutions over which they possess little control. Modern historical scholarship increasingly seeks to recover these diverse perspectives. Ships provide valuable evidence because they connect multiple social worlds simultaneously. Imagine ports throughout the Caribbean receiving vessels arriving from transatlantic routes. Harbor officials record arrivals. Merchants negotiate transactions. Local economies respond to new goods and information. Maritime commerce influences daily life far beyond the ships themselves. Entire communities depend upon successful navigation and transportation. The future Queen Anne's Revenge contributes to these processes repeatedly. Its voyages support networks extending across vast geographic distances. Imagine the vessel gradually accumulating history. Every crossing adds experience. Repairs become necessary. Equipment is replaced. Crew members come and go. Ships evolve over time because maritime life imposes continuous demands. The vessel's physical structure changes through use, maintenance, and adaptation. These gradual transformations often receive less attention than dramatic events, yet they play important roles in shaping a ship's career. Imagine standing on the deck during a quiet evening in the middle of the Atlantic. The horizon stretches endlessly beneath a sky filled with stars. The ship moves steadily through darkness guided by wind and navigational knowledge. Such moments encourage reflection. Sailors may think about previous voyages, future destinations, or lives waiting in distant ports. Maritime history consists not only of famous events but also of countless ordinary experiences like these. The future Queen Anne's Revenge spends years accumulating such memories before entering legend. Imagine historians centuries later attempting to reconstruct the vessel's early life. Documents provide valuable information, yet gaps remain. Records preserve certain details while overlooking others. This challenge characterizes much historical research. Scholars assemble evidence from multiple sources to create broader understandings. The ship's participation in Atlantic commerce becomes clearer when viewed within larger patterns affecting the entire region. Imagine the irony visible in hindsight. A vessel operating within established commercial systems will eventually become associated with piracy, a practice often portrayed as opposition to those very systems. The transformation has not yet occurred. For now, the ship remains an ordinary participant in Atlantic trade. Yet circumstances are changing elsewhere. Pirate activity is increasing. Maritime competition is intensifying. Opportunities for capture and confrontation are growing. The vessel's future is moving toward a pivotal moment. Imagine the final commercial voyages before that transformation begins. The ship continues performing familiar functions. Part 3: Capture at Sea. As we arrive at the final segment of the first chapter and follow the vessel toward the moment that would alter its destiny forever, we leave behind the world of routine commerce and enter the unpredictable realm of piracy. For years, the ship that would eventually become Queen Anne's Revenge had served within the commercial networks of the Atlantic world. It crossed oceans, visited ports, carried cargo, and participated in systems established by merchants and governments. Yet history is often shaped by unexpected encounters. A single meeting at sea can transform a ship's purpose, ownership, reputation, and future. The vessel we have been following was approaching precisely such a moment. Somewhere in the waters of the Caribbean and Atlantic, pirate activity was increasing. Trade routes that generated immense wealth also attracted those willing to seize opportunities outside the boundaries of official authority. Among the growing number of pirates operating during this period was a captain whose name would become one of the most famous in maritime history. His real name was Edward Teach, though most people knew him simply as Blackbeard. At the time, however, Neither the ship nor its crew could know that their paths were about to cross with a figure whose reputation would survive for centuries. Imagine the Atlantic world during the year 1717. Piracy had become a significant concern for merchants and colonial authorities. The conclusion of various European conflicts had left many experienced sailors seeking opportunities. Some entered legitimate commerce. Others turned toward piracy. The Caribbean, with its busy trade routes, countless islands, and vast stretches of open water, provided ideal conditions for pirate activity. Merchant captains understood the risks. Every voyage contained the possibility of encountering vessels whose intentions were far from peaceful. Yet commerce continued because the rewards remained substantial. Ships sailed despite the dangers because economic necessity demanded movement across the sea. Imagine the vessel known at the time as La Concorde moving steadily through Atlantic waters. The ship had completed numerous voyages. Its crew was familiar with maritime routines. Officers monitored navigation. Sailors adjusted sails according to changing winds. Daily life followed established patterns. Yet beneath this appearance of normality existed uncertainty. The ocean rarely provides advance notice of approaching events. A distant sail on the horizon can signal opportunity, danger, or simple coincidence. Everything depends upon identity and circumstance. Imagine a lookout positioned high above the deck, scanning the horizon as sailors had done for centuries. The task requires patience and concentration. Hours may pass without significant observations. Then suddenly, a shape appears in the distance. At first, details remain unclear. The vessel is too far away for precise identification. Sailors begin speculating. Is it a merchant ship? A naval vessel? Another traveler following similar routes? Such questions arise naturally whenever ships encounter one another at sea. Information is limited. Assumptions must often be made before certainty becomes available. Imagine the growing realization that the approaching vessel may belong to pirates. Merchant crews during this period understood the implications immediately. Pirates often preferred targets offering valuable cargo while presenting limited resistance. They relied upon mobility, reputation, and tactical advantage. A successful pirate captain understood that intimidation could prove as effective as force. Convincing a target to surrender peacefully reduced risks for everyone involved. Blackbeard would become particularly skilled at cultivating such psychological influence. Imagine the vessel commanded by Blackbeard drawing closer. Historical accounts suggest that by 1717, he had already begun building a reputation among sailors operating in the region. Stories circulated through ports and maritime communities. Some details were certainly exaggerated, as pirate legends often were. Yet the underlying reality remained significant. Blackbeard was emerging as a formidable presence within the Atlantic world. His success depended not only upon courage but also upon careful understanding of maritime strategy. Imagine the tension aboard La Concorde as the situation becomes clearer. Merchant crews confronted with pirate vessels faced difficult choices. Resistance could lead to damage, injury, or worse. Surrender might preserve lives while sacrificing cargo and control of the ship. Every circumstance differed according to the vessels involved, the strength of crews, weather conditions, and numerous other factors. Maritime encounters rarely followed simple patterns. Decisions carried consequences extending far beyond the immediate moment. Imagine the actual capture unfolding. Historical evidence indicates that Blackbeard successfully seized La Concorde in late 1717. The event itself may have occurred relatively quickly compared to the legendary status it later acquired. Many pirate captures were resolved through intimidation and negotiation rather than prolonged combat. Pirates generally preferred preserving valuable ships rather than damaging them unnecessarily. A captured vessel represented opportunity. Destroying it would undermine the very purpose of the encounter. Imagine the moment ownership changes. One chapter of the ship's life ends. Another begins. The transformation is not yet visible physically, but it has already begun conceptually. The vessel built in France, employed within commercial networks, and shaped by years of ordinary maritime service is now under entirely different leadership. Its future trajectory shifts dramatically. New purposes replace old ones. Different priorities emerge. The ship enters the world of piracy. Imagine Blackbeard evaluating his prize. Experienced pirate captains understood the value of quality vessels. Not every captured ship justified long-term use. Some were stripped of useful supplies and released. Others were retained because they offered strategic advantages. La Concorde possessed characteristics that immediately attracted attention. It was large, capable, and well-suited for modification. Blackbeard recognized possibilities extending beyond simple profit. He saw the potential foundation of something greater. Imagine sailors aboard the captured vessel observing these developments. Some may remain uncertain about their futures. Others adapt quickly to changing circumstances. Maritime life often required flexibility because control could shift unexpectedly. Ships existed within environments where fortunes changed rapidly. The capture of La Concorde illustrates this reality perfectly. One encounter alters years of established patterns. Imagine the symbolic significance of this moment. Historians often identify turning points only in retrospect. Participants experience events as unfolding realities rather than completed narratives. Yet, from our perspective, the importance is unmistakable. Without this capture, there would be no Queen Anne's Revenge. The legendary flagship associated with Blackbeard would never exist. The vessel's future fame depends entirely upon the encounter we have explored tonight. Imagine the captured ship continuing across the sea beneath familiar winds and skies. The ocean remains unchanged. Waves continue moving beneath the hull. Yet everything else is different. Ownership has changed. Purpose has changed. Identity is about to change. The commercial vessel known as La Concorde is approaching the end of its previous existence. Ahead lies a new chapter defined by piracy, ambition, and legend. And soon, Blackbeard will begin transforming his captured prize into one of the most feared ships ever to sail the Atlantic. As the captured vessel settles into its new reality under Blackbeard's control, and the immediate uncertainties surrounding its seizure begin to fade, a remarkable transformation starts taking shape. History often remembers dramatic moments because they are easy to identify. Battles, captures, discoveries, and disasters attract attention naturally. Yet some of the most important changes occur afterward, during quieter periods when decisions are made and plans are implemented. Part 4. Blackbeard's New Flagship. As we enter the second chapter of our story and follow the captured vessel into its new life under Blackbeard's command, we witness one of the most remarkable transformations in maritime history. The ship that had once crossed the Atlantic as a French commercial vessel was no longer simply a participant in established trade networks. It was becoming something entirely different. Under the direction of Blackbeard, the captured La Concorde would soon be reshaped into a vessel capable of projecting power across vast stretches of ocean. More importantly, it would become the center of a growing pirate enterprise. The transformation did not happen overnight. Ships, like reputations, are built gradually. Timber and iron can be modified relatively quickly, but the creation of a legendary flagship requires vision, resources, and leadership. Blackbeard understood that controlling a large and capable vessel offered opportunities unavailable to captains operating smaller ships. He was no longer thinking only about individual raids. He was thinking about influence, mobility, and the creation of a maritime presence that others would recognize immediately. Imagine the captured vessel shortly after it entered pirate hands. Its broad decks and sturdy hull already possessed qualities admired by experienced sailors. The ship had proven its ability to survive Atlantic crossings and carry substantial cargo. Yet, from Blackbeard's perspective, it remained incomplete. A merchant vessel and a pirate flagship serve very different purposes. Merchant ships prioritize transportation and commercial efficiency. Pirate vessels prioritize flexibility, intimidation, and tactical advantage. The ship would therefore require modification before it could fulfill its new role. Imagine crews moving across the decks as preparations begin. Supplies are reorganized. Equipment is inspected. Sailors assess the ship's strengths and weaknesses. Pirate crews often included individuals possessing significant maritime experience. Many had previously served aboard merchant or naval vessels. Their knowledge allowed them to evaluate captured ships effectively. The transformation of La Concorde into Queen Anne's Revenge was not merely the work of one captain. It depended upon the skills and labor of many sailors working together. Imagine Blackbeard studying the vessel carefully. Historical accounts suggest he possessed a practical understanding of maritime operations. Successful pirate captains needed more than courage. They required logistical awareness, navigational competence, and the ability to manage complex crews. Blackbeard recognized that the captured vessel offered possibilities extending beyond ordinary piracy. Its size alone distinguished it from many ships operating in the region. Larger vessels could carry more crew members, support additional weapons, and undertake longer voyages. Such advantages translated directly into influence. Imagine the process of increasing the ship's firepower. Cannons represented both practical weapons and psychological tools. A heavily armed vessel communicated strength immediately. Merchant captains evaluating potential resistance considered not only crew size but also available armament. Blackbeard understood the value of intimidation. Convincing targets to surrender peacefully often proved preferable to engaging in costly battles. Every cannon mounted aboard the ship contributed to its reputation. Over time, the vessel would carry approximately 40 guns, making it one of the most formidable pirate ships of its era. Imagine workers positioning artillery across the decks. Each cannon requires careful placement because weight distribution influences sailing performance. Ships must balance firepower with maneuverability. Excessive armament can create problems if not managed properly. Maritime engineering, therefore, involves constant compromise. The transformation into a floating fortress required attention to such practical details. Blackbeard's flagship needed to remain effective as both a sailing vessel and a platform for intimidation. Imagine the symbolic importance of naming the ship. At some point during this transformation, the vessel received the name Queen Anne's Revenge. Historians continue debating the precise reasons behind the choice, yet the name itself carried significant implications. Names shape perception. They communicate identity before any encounter occurs. Queen Anne had ruled Britain earlier in the century, and references to her remained politically meaningful in certain circles. Whether the name reflected political sympathies, symbolic messaging, or other motivations, it immediately distinguished the vessel from its previous existence. The French merchant ship La Concorde was gone. Queen Anne's Revenge had arrived. Imagine sailors throughout the Caribbean hearing the new name for the first time. Maritime information spread through conversations, reports, and rumor. Certain names attracted attention more effectively than others. Queen Anne's Revenge sounded powerful and memorable. Combined with Blackbeard's growing reputation, it quickly became associated with danger and unpredictability. The ship's identity was being crafted deliberately. Reputation would become one of its most valuable assets. Imagine the growing pirate fleet surrounding the flagship. Successful captains often operated with multiple vessels rather than relying exclusively upon a single ship. Smaller vessels provided flexibility while larger ships projected authority. Queen Anne's Revenge became the centerpiece of this network. Its presence enhanced the effectiveness of accompanying vessels. Together, they formed a mobile maritime force capable of influencing trade routes across a wide region. Imagine the psychological effect of encountering such a fleet at sea. Merchant captains already faced uncertainty whenever unfamiliar sails appeared on the horizon. The appearance of a large flagship accompanied by additional vessels dramatically increased that uncertainty. Decisions had to be made quickly. Resistance might prove futile. Escape might be impossible. Blackbeard's growing maritime presence therefore influenced events before any confrontation occurred. The mere possibility of encountering Queen Anne's Revenge affected behavior throughout the Atlantic world. Imagine evenings aboard the transforming vessel. Work continues beneath lantern light. Crews prepare for future voyages. Discussions turn toward opportunities, destinations, and strategy. The ship is becoming more than a collection of timber and cannons. It is becoming the physical embodiment of Blackbeard's ambitions. Every modification strengthens its capabilities. Every voyage contributes to its emerging reputation. Imagine standing on the deck as the newly named Queen Anne's Revenge cuts through Caribbean waters beneath favorable winds. The transformation is still ongoing, yet the difference is already visible. The vessel carries a new identity. It serves a new purpose. It belongs to a different world. What began as a French commercial ship is evolving into one of the most feared pirate flagships in history. And as its reputation spreads from port to port, the floating fortress is preparing to make its presence known across the Atlantic. As Queen Anne's Revenge continues its transformation from captured merchant vessel into Blackbeard's formidable flagship, we begin to see that the ship's greatest strength did not come solely from its size or its armament. Those qualities certainly mattered, but many vessels throughout history possessed impressive firepower. What made Queen Anne's Revenge extraordinary was the way it combined physical capability with reputation, strategy, and symbolism. Blackbeard understood something that many successful leaders throughout history have recognized. Power depends not only upon what a force can do, but also upon what others believe it can do. The ship was becoming a floating fortress in both practical and psychological terms. Its presence influenced decisions before battles occurred. Its name traveled ahead of it. Its reputation expanded beyond the limits of direct experience. To understand how this happened, we must examine the relationship between the flagship and the growing pirate enterprise that surrounded it. Imagine the Caribbean during the late 1710s. Trade routes crisscross the region continuously. Merchant vessels move between colonies, ports, and international markets. Valuable cargo travels through waters dotted with islands, reefs, and hidden anchorages. Geography creates opportunities for those familiar with local conditions. Pirate captains exploit this environment effectively because mobility and knowledge provide advantages. Blackbeard's acquisition of Queen Anne's Revenge significantly expands those advantages. The ship allows him to operate on a larger scale than many competitors. Imagine a merchant captain receiving reports about pirate activity before beginning a voyage. Information arrives through harbor conversations, official notices, and maritime rumor. Certain names appear repeatedly. Blackbeard increasingly becomes one of them. Reports describe a growing fleet centered around a large flagship carrying substantial armament. Details vary according to source, yet a consistent image emerges. The captain and his ship are becoming known throughout the region. Reputation functions as a form of influence traveling faster than physical movement. Queen Anne's Revenge benefits enormously from this process. Imagine the logistical challenges associated with operating a large pirate flagship. More crew members require additional supplies. Larger vessels demand greater maintenance. Cannons need ammunition. Rigging requires constant attention. Successful piracy, therefore, depends upon organization as well as daring. Blackbeard appears to have managed these responsibilities effectively during the height of his career. The flagship served not only as a weapon but also as a mobile headquarters supporting broader operations. Imagine the crew assembled aboard Queen Anne's Revenge. Pirate crews often attracted individuals from diverse backgrounds. Some were experienced sailors seeking opportunity. Others had served aboard merchant or naval vessels before turning to piracy. Motivations varied considerably. Yet life aboard a large flagship created shared experiences. Sailors worked together maintaining the ship, navigating difficult waters, and pursuing collective goals. The vessel became a community as much as a machine. Imagine dawn breaking over calm Caribbean waters as Queen Anne's Revenge prepares for another day at sea. The ship's size creates an imposing silhouette against the horizon. Sails catch early sunlight. Crew members begin daily routines. Lookouts scan the distance. Officers coordinate activities. From afar, the vessel communicates confidence and capability. Such visual impressions matter. Maritime encounters often begin long before ships come within speaking distance. Appearance influences expectations. Expectations influence decisions. Imagine Blackbeard himself moving through the flagship. Historical accounts describe him as a figure highly aware of symbolism and presentation. Stories about his appearance frequently emphasize dramatic details intended to intimidate observers. Whether every account is accurate matters less than the broader point. Blackbeard understood reputation as a strategic asset. Queen Anne's Revenge served as an extension of that philosophy. The ship's size, armament, and identity all contributed to a carefully cultivated image. Imagine smaller pirate vessels operating alongside the flagship. Each serves specific functions within the larger enterprise. Smaller ships may scout ahead, pursue targets, or navigate areas inaccessible to larger vessels. Queen Anne's Revenge provides support, authority, and firepower. Together, the fleet becomes more effective than any individual vessel operating alone. Maritime strategy often depends upon coordination. Blackbeard appears to have recognized this principle clearly. Imagine the reactions of sailors spotting Queen Anne's Revenge on the horizon. Recognition itself becomes significant. Many ships at sea remain anonymous until close inspection. Famous vessels are different. Their identities are sometimes suspected long before certainty becomes possible. The distinctive combination of a large pirate flagship and Blackbeard's reputation creates immediate psychological effects. Merchant crews must consider options carefully. Every decision carries risks. The ship's influence, therefore, extends beyond its physical presence. Imagine evenings in distant ports where sailors discuss recent encounters. Stories spread naturally. Some emphasize the flagship's size. Others focus upon Blackbeard's leadership. Certain details become exaggerated through repetition. Yet even exaggerated stories contribute to reputation. Maritime folklore and practical information often intermingle. Queen Anne's Revenge begins occupying space within both categories simultaneously. It is a real ship producing real consequences, yet it is also becoming a legend. Imagine the broader political implications of such developments. Colonial authorities increasingly view piracy as a serious threat. Trade disruptions affect economic interests. Governments seek ways to restore control over maritime routes. The growing prominence of Blackbeard and his flagship therefore attracts attention beyond ordinary commercial concerns. Queen Anne's Revenge becomes more than a pirate vessel. It becomes a symbol of challenges facing imperial authorities throughout the Atlantic world. Imagine standing upon the deck as the flagship sails through open water beneath a sky filled with clouds and sunlight. Around it move smaller vessels forming a loose fleet. Ahead lie opportunities and dangers. Behind lies the ordinary commercial life of La Concorde. The transformation is complete. Queen Anne's Revenge now exists as a fully realized pirate flagship. Its reputation continues growing. Its influence continues expanding. Yet history often grants only brief periods of dominance. The very success that elevates the ship will eventually attract increasing opposition. For now, however, the floating fortress stands at the height of its power, ready to carry Blackbeard into the most famous chapter of his career and into the legends that will survive long after the ship itself is gone. Part 5: Life aboard Queen Anne's Revenge. As Queen Anne's Revenge reaches the height of its influence and Blackbeard's reputation spreads throughout the Atlantic world, it becomes easy to focus exclusively on dramatic encounters, famous raids, and legendary stories. Yet beneath the growing reputation of the flagship existed another reality, one experienced every day by the men who lived and worked aboard the vessel. Ships are often remembered for extraordinary moments, but they spend most of their lives engaged in ordinary routines. Even one of history's most famous pirate ships required constant maintenance, organization, and labor. Understanding life aboard Queen Anne's Revenge helps reveal the human dimension behind the legend. It reminds us that the floating fortress was not merely a symbol of piracy. It was also a working community at sea, carrying dozens of individuals who depended upon cooperation, discipline, and skill to survive in a challenging environment. Imagine dawn arriving over the Caribbean Sea aboard Queen Anne's Revenge. Long before the sun rises fully above the horizon, activity begins across the ship. Maritime life follows rhythms shaped by necessity rather than convenience. Sailors cannot simply pause operations because they are tired. The ship requires attention continuously. Wind conditions change. Equipment needs inspection. Navigation demands observation. Crew members rotate through duties according to established schedules. The day begins not with adventure but with responsibility. Imagine standing upon the deck as the first light spreads across the water. The sea appears calm. Gentle waves move beneath the hull. Sailors emerge from sleeping areas and prepare for another day at sea. Some inspect rigging. Others check sails. Officers review navigational information. The routines may seem repetitive, yet repetition creates reliability. Ships survive because ordinary tasks are performed consistently. Queen Anne's Revenge, despite its fearsome reputation, depends upon the same practical realities governing every sailing vessel of the age. Imagine the crew itself. Historical estimates suggest that at various points the flagship may have carried well over 200 people, making it one of the larger pirate vessels operating in the Atlantic. Such numbers create both advantages and challenges. A large crew provides manpower for sailing, maintenance, and combat. Yet every additional person requires food, water, and living space. Managing these resources becomes a central concern. Life aboard a ship involves constant balancing between available supplies and future needs. Imagine the limited space available below deck. Modern audiences sometimes imagine pirate ships as spacious environments filled with comfort and freedom. The reality is considerably different. Space is precious aboard any sailing vessel. Crew members often sleep in crowded conditions. Personal possessions remain limited. Privacy is scarce. The ship functions as a workplace and a home simultaneously. Sailors adapt because maritime life leaves few alternatives. Queen Anne's Revenge may have been larger than many pirate vessels, but it still required efficient use of every available area. Imagine meals aboard the Flagship. Food storage presents ongoing challenges during long voyages. Fresh supplies deteriorate quickly in maritime environments. Crews therefore rely heavily upon preserved foods capable of surviving extended periods at sea. Meals are practical rather than luxurious. Yet they remain important because they provide not only nutrition but also structure. Shared meals create opportunities for conversation and community. Even aboard a feared pirate flagship, ordinary human needs remain central to daily life. Imagine sailors maintaining the ship throughout the day. Wooden vessels require constant attention. Saltwater affects materials continuously. Rigging wears through use. Sails suffer damage from wind and weather. Small problems can become serious if ignored. Maintenance therefore occupies significant portions of a sailor's time. The image of pirates constantly pursuing treasure overlooks this reality. Successful maritime operations depend upon labor. Queen Anne's Revenge remains effective because its crew invests substantial effort in preserving its capabilities. Imagine the role of specialized skills aboard the ship. Not every crew member performs identical tasks. Navigation requires experience and knowledge. Carpentry becomes essential when repairs are needed. Sail handling demands coordination. Medical care, limited though it may be by modern standards, requires practical expertise. Large vessels function through cooperation among individuals possessing different abilities. The flagship's success reflects collective competence rather than individual heroics alone. Imagine periods of calm weather when the ship moves slowly across smooth water. Such moments provide opportunities for routine activities. Equipment can be repaired. Supplies can be organized. Conversations become more relaxed. Maritime life contains long stretches where nothing dramatic occurs. Yet these quieter periods are essential. They allow crews to recover from previous challenges and prepare for future ones. Queen Anne's Revenge spends much of its existence in such conditions rather than in constant conflict. Imagine the social dynamics aboard the vessel. Pirate crews often developed distinctive cultures shaped by shared experiences. Life at sea creates strong interdependence. Crew members rely upon one another during storms, navigational challenges, and emergencies. Cooperation becomes practical necessity. While disagreements certainly occurred, survival encouraged forms of mutual support. The flagship functions as a community because it must. No individual can operate such a vessel alone. Imagine evenings aboard Queen Anne's Revenge after daily duties are completed. Lanterns provide limited illumination. Sailors gather in small groups. Stories are exchanged. Experiences from previous voyages become subjects of conversation. Maritime storytelling traditions flourish in such environments. Information spreads through personal narratives. Legends begin as shared observations. The ship contributes to maritime culture not only through its actions, but also through the stories generated aboard it. Imagine storms interrupting these routines. Weather remains one of the greatest challenges facing all sailors regardless of occupation. When conditions deteriorate, priorities shift immediately. Sails must be adjusted, equipment secured. Crew members focus entirely upon protecting the vessel. Such experiences reinforce the importance of preparation and discipline. The sea often reminds sailors that nature operates according to its own rules. Even the most feared pirate flagship remains vulnerable to environmental forces. Imagine standing on the deck as twilight settles across the Caribbean. The day's work is largely complete. The ship moves steadily beneath darkening skies. Around you, crew members prepare for another night at sea. The floating fortress appears powerful from a distance, yet up close it reveals a more complex reality. Queen Anne's Revenge is not only a pirate legend. It is also a working community sustained by countless acts of labor, cooperation, and adaptation. Understanding these ordinary routines brings us closer to understanding the people who lived aboard the ship and the world they inhabited every day. As another day unfolds aboard Queen Anne's Revenge and the routines of maritime life continue shaping the experiences of its crew, we begin to understand that the success of a large pirate flagship depended upon much more than weapons and reputation. A ship could possess impressive firepower and a feared captain, yet without effective organization it would quickly encounter serious difficulties. Life aboard Queen Anne's Revenge required constant coordination. Every sail adjustment, navigational decision, maintenance task, and supply calculation contributed to the vessel's ability to operate across vast stretches of ocean. The floating fortress existed not only because Blackbeard commanded it, but because hundreds of ordinary actions performed by ordinary sailors allowed it to function day after day. Behind every maritime legend lies a practical reality. And aboard Queen Anne's Revenge, that reality was shaped by the challenges of living at sea for extended periods of time. Imagine the ship moving steadily through Caribbean waters during a typical voyage. The horizon stretches in every direction. Land may remain out of sight for days. Under such circumstances, self-sufficiency becomes essential. Once a vessel leaves port, opportunities to replace supplies are limited. Food, water, tools, and equipment must be managed carefully. Crew members understand that waste can create future problems. Maritime life encourages habits of conservation because resources remain finite. Queen Anne's Revenge, despite its size, faces the same limitations affecting every sailing vessel of the era. Imagine the importance of fresh water. Modern audiences often take reliable access to water for granted, yet sailors of the 18th century viewed it as one of their most valuable resources. Large quantities must be stored before departure. Containers require maintenance. Consumption must be monitored. Long voyages demand careful planning because shortages can become dangerous quickly. Water management therefore occupies a central place within daily operations. The flagship's ability to sustain a large crew depends partly upon successful control of this essential resource. Imagine navigational duties aboard the ship. Determining position at sea remains a complex task during this period. Sailors rely upon observations, instruments, charts, and accumulated experience. Officers responsible for navigation carry significant responsibilities because errors can affect the entire crew. Reefs, shoals, storms, and inaccurate calculations all present potential hazards. The success of Queen Anne's Revenge, therefore, depends not only upon strength but also upon knowledge. Maritime expertise remains one of the most valuable assets aboard any vessel. Imagine lookouts positioned high above the deck scanning the horizon. Their work requires concentration and patience. Most observations prove routine. Distant clouds, changing weather conditions, and occasional ships appear throughout the day. Yet the importance of vigilance cannot be overstated. Early detection provides options. Merchant vessels may represent opportunities. Naval ships may represent threats. Weather systems may require preparation. Information gathered by lookouts influences decisions throughout the vessel. Their role demonstrates how interconnected maritime operations become. Imagine maintenance continuing even during seemingly uneventful periods. Wooden ships exist in constant dialogue with their environment. Saltwater, sunlight, wind, and motion affect materials continuously. Sailors repair minor damage before it becomes major damage. Rigging is inspected repeatedly. Hull conditions are monitored carefully. The floating fortress remains powerful because its crew invests effort preserving that power. Maritime history often celebrates dramatic events, yet routine maintenance contributes just as significantly to a ship's survival. Imagine the sounds filling Queen Anne's Revenge during a normal day. Waves strike the hull rhythmically. Rigging creaks in response to wind. Sailors exchange instructions. Tools strike wood during repairs. Footsteps move across the deck. Such sounds create the atmosphere of life at sea. They remind us that the ship is not a static object but a dynamic environment constantly responding to changing conditions. Part 6: Master of the Caribbean. As Queen Anne's Revenge reaches the peak of its power and Blackbeard's reputation spreads throughout the Atlantic world, the ship begins to occupy a unique place within the maritime landscape of the early 18th century. It is no longer simply a captured merchant vessel converted for pirate purposes. Nor is it merely a large ship carrying an ambitious captain. By this stage, Queen Anne's Revenge has become a symbol. Merchants recognize its name. Sailors discuss its movements in distant ports. Colonial officials monitor reports concerning its activities. The floating fortress has evolved into one of the most influential pirate vessels of its age. To understand how this happened, we must examine the period during which Blackbeard and his flagship exercised their greatest influence across the Caribbean and Atlantic trade routes. This was the moment when reputation, strategy, and opportunity combined to create one of the most enduring legends in maritime history. Imagine the Caribbean during the height of the Golden Age of Piracy. Countless islands scatter across warm blue waters. Trade routes connect colonies with Europe and North America. Merchant ships carry valuable cargo through passages that have become essential to international commerce. Geography plays a crucial role in shaping events. Narrow channels, hidden coves, and isolated anchorages create opportunities for those familiar with local conditions. Pirate captains understand these advantages well. Mobility and knowledge often prove more valuable than raw force. Blackbeard appears particularly skilled at exploiting such circumstances. Imagine Queen Anne's Revenge sailing confidently through these waters. Its broad hull and impressive armament distinguish it from many vessels encountered at sea. The ship's very appearance communicates authority. Merchant captains spotting the flagship on the horizon must immediately consider difficult questions. Should they attempt escape? Is resistance possible? Would surrender preserve lives and property? Such decisions often occur before ships come close enough for detailed observation. Reputation influences behavior long before direct contact takes place. Queen Anne's Revenge benefits enormously from this reality. Imagine reports of the flagship spreading through maritime communities. Information travels by ship, letter, conversation, and rumor. A captain arriving in one port shares news heard elsewhere. Sailors exchange stories while unloading cargo. Merchants discuss threats affecting future voyages. Through these informal networks, Blackbeard's name becomes increasingly familiar. The flagship's reputation grows alongside his own. Some accounts are accurate, others contain exaggerations, yet all contribute to the development of a larger narrative. The ship is becoming legendary even while its career continues. Imagine a merchant vessel beginning a routine voyage between colonial ports. The crew prepares carefully. Cargo is secured. Navigation plans are reviewed. Yet beneath these practical concerns exists awareness of piracy. The possibility of encountering Blackbeard influences decisions before departure. Routes may be adjusted. Additional precautions may be considered. Such indirect effects demonstrate the broader significance of reputation. Queen Anne's Revenge impacts maritime behavior even when it remains far away. Imagine the strategic advantages provided by a large flagship. Smaller pirate vessels often excel at speed and maneuverability. A substantial ship like Queen Anne's Revenge offers different benefits. can support larger crews, can carry greater supplies. It can project authority more effectively. Blackbeard appears to have recognized that influence depends partly upon perception. The flagship functions as a mobile symbol of strength, reinforcing his position within both pirate and commercial worlds. Imagine the famous blockade of the port of Charleston in 1718, one of the most remarkable episodes associated with Blackbeard and Queen Anne's revenge. Charleston was an important colonial port, connected to broader trade networks throughout the Atlantic. Yet despite its significance, Blackbeard's forces successfully disrupted maritime traffic entering and leaving the harbor. The event demonstrated the extent of pirate influence during this period. It also illustrated the capabilities of a well-organized fleet operating under effective leadership. Queen Anne's revenge played a central role in projecting that influence. Imagine ships approaching Charleston during the blockade. Captains expect routine arrivals and departures. Instead, they encounter a situation shaped by pirate control. Maritime commerce depends upon predictability. Disruptions therefore attract immediate attention. News of the blockade spreads rapidly because it affects economic interests extending far beyond the harbor itself. Blackbeard's actions demonstrate that piracy can influence major commercial centers rather than merely isolated vessels. Imagine the psychological impact of such events. Colonial authorities recognize that pirates are not simply criminals operating at the margins of society. Under certain conditions, they can challenge established systems directly. Queen Anne's revenge contributes to this realization. The flagship symbolizes capabilities exceeding those of ordinary pirate craft. This presence transforms perceptions of what piracy can achieve. Imagine sailors discussing the blockade months later in distant ports. Stories evolve through repetition. Details become more dramatic. Blackbeard's reputation grows accordingly. Maritime folklore often develops through precisely this process. Real events provide foundations. Repeated retelling amplifies significance. The flagship becomes a central character within narratives extending across the Atlantic world. Imagine daily life aboard Queen Anne's Revenge during this period of success. The crew continues performing familiar tasks. Sails require maintenance. Supplies must be managed. Navigation remains essential. Yet the atmosphere may feel different. Success influences morale. Reputation generates confidence. The ship's achievements reinforce belief in its capabilities. Such psychological factors matter because maritime operations depend heavily upon collective effort and shared expectations. Imagine standing on the deck as Queen Anne's Revenge sails beneath favorable winds through waters where its name is already known. Around the ship stretches a region shaped increasingly by its influence. Merchant captains watch carefully. Authorities gather information. Sailors exchange stories. The floating fortress has achieved something remarkable. It has become more than a vessel. It has become a presence within the Atlantic world. Yet history rarely allows such dominance to continue indefinitely. Every period of success attracts attention. Every growing reputation creates new challenges. For now, however, Queen Anne's Revenge stands at the height of its power, master of the Caribbean and centerpiece of one of the most famous pirate enterprises ever assembled. As Queen Anne's Revenge continues its reign as Blackbeard's flagship and its reputation reaches ports throughout the Atlantic world, we begin to see how legends are created not only through individual events but through sustained influence over time. A single successful raid may attract attention. A dramatic encounter may generate stories. Yet true maritime legends emerge when repeated actions create recognizable patterns. By 1718, Queen Anne's Revenge had become associated with exactly such a pattern. Wherever reports of the ship appeared, they carried familiar themes: strength, mobility, confidence, uncertainty. Merchants viewed the flagship as a threat, Sailors regarded it with fascination. Authorities considered it a problem requiring attention. The vessel's significance extended beyond any one voyage because it had become part of the larger conversation shaping Atlantic maritime life. Imagine the network of information connecting ports throughout the Caribbean, North America, and Europe. In an age before telegraphs or modern communication systems, news still traveled surprisingly effectively. Ships served as carriers of information as well as cargo. Every arrival brought updates concerning weather, trade conditions, political developments, and pirate activity. Certain names appeared repeatedly within these reports. Blackbeard became one of the most discussed figures of the era. Consequently, Queen Anne's Revenge also achieved widespread recognition. Its reputation moved ahead of it, often arriving before the ship itself. Imagine a harbor tavern crowded with sailors after sunset. Conversations drift between recent voyages and future plans. Someone mentions seeing a large pirate flagship in distant waters. Another sailor claims to have heard reports from Charleston. A merchant captain describes altered routes designed to avoid potential encounters. Such discussions contribute directly to the formation of maritime folklore. Information mixes with rumor. Facts combine with speculation. Over time, the resulting narrative acquires a life of its own. Queen Anne's Revenge becomes both a real ship and a story simultaneously. Imagine the practical challenges facing colonial authorities during this period. Trade generates wealth and supports settlements throughout the Atlantic world. Protecting shipping, therefore, becomes a priority. Yet vast distances complicate enforcement efforts. Pirate captains exploit these limitations effectively. They move quickly between regions. They utilize local knowledge. They take advantage of communication delays. Blackbeard's flagship benefits from these conditions. Its mobility allows it to appear where opportunities exist and depart before organized responses can be coordinated. Imagine the symbolic importance of controlling movement. Maritime power often involves influencing where ships can travel safely. The Charleston blockade demonstrated this principle clearly. By disrupting access to an important port, Blackbeard revealed vulnerabilities within existing systems. The event attracted attention because it challenged assumptions about security and authority. Queen Anne's Revenge played a central role in making such actions possible. The flagship size and capabilities amplified the effectiveness of the broader pirate fleet. Imagine merchants recalculating risks before launching new voyages. Maritime commerce always involves uncertainty. Weather, navigation, and market conditions create variables beyond complete control. Piracy adds another layer of complexity. The growing prominence of Blackbeard and Queen Anne's Revenge therefore influences economic decision-making. Ships may carry additional precautions. Routes may be adjusted. Insurance costs may rise. The flagship's impact extends beyond direct encounters because it alters expectations throughout the region. Imagine the contrast between perception and reality. Historical pirate careers often prove shorter than legends suggest. Queen Anne's Revenge itself enjoyed only a relatively brief period of prominence. Yet intensity can compensate for duration. Events occurring within a limited time frame may leave lasting impressions if they capture public attention effectively. Blackbeard's flagship exemplifies this phenomenon. Its influence becomes memorable because it coincides with a period when piracy occupies a significant place within Atlantic affairs. Imagine sailors spotting the ship from a distance during its most famous months. The silhouette alone may trigger recognition. A large vessel associated with Blackbeard immediately commands attention. Observers begin evaluating possibilities. Is this truly Queen Anne's Revenge? What intentions does the crew possess? Such reactions illustrate the power of reputation. The ship's identity shapes responses before direct interaction becomes necessary. Imagine the crew aboard the Flagship during this period. They continue performing routine duties despite the growing legend surrounding them. Sails still require adjustment. Equipment still requires maintenance. Meals still need preparation. This contrast between ordinary experience and extraordinary reputation appears frequently in history. Individuals living through famous events often encounter them as daily realities rather than historical milestones. The crew of Queen Anne's Revenge contributes to a legend while simultaneously managing practical concerns. Imagine the broader cultural impact of pirate stories. Maritime communities preserve narratives because they provide entertainment, education, and shared identity. Blackbeard's Flagship becomes ideal material for such storytelling. Possesses dramatic qualities. It participates in notable events. It symbolizes broader themes associated with piracy. Consequently, stories about the ship spread rapidly and survive long after individual voyages conclude. Imagine the horizon stretching before Queen Anne's Revenge during one of its final successful voyages. The ship remains powerful. Its reputation remains strong. Its influence remains considerable. Yet unseen forces are already gathering. Colonial authorities are becoming increasingly determined to suppress piracy. Political priorities are shifting. Opportunities that once seemed abundant are beginning to narrow. History often appears stable until change arrives suddenly. The period of dominance enjoyed by Blackbeard and his Flagship will not last forever. Imagine standing aboard the floating fortress as evening settles across the Caribbean Sea. The ship moves confidently through waters where its name is known and its presence respected. Around it lies a world shaped partly by its actions. Merchants alter plans because of it. Sailors tell stories about it. Officials monitor reports concerning it. Queen Anne's Revenge has achieved the status of a true maritime legend. Yet legends often reach their peak just before circumstances change. The floating fortress stands at the height of its power, seemingly invincible against the fading light. But beyond the horizon, events are already unfolding that will soon bring its remarkable career to an unexpected and dramatic end. Part 7: The Grounding at Beaufort Inlet. As we enter the final chapter of the story of Queen Anne's Revenge and leave behind the period of triumph that established the ship's legendary reputation, we arrive at a moment that reminds us of one of the most enduring truths in maritime history. No matter how powerful a vessel may seem, no matter how famous its captain becomes, and no matter how far its reputation spreads across oceans, every ship remains vulnerable to circumstance. Storms, navigational challenges, hidden shoals, changing tides, and human decisions have ended the careers of countless vessels throughout history. Queen Anne's Revenge, despite its status as Blackbeard's floating fortress, would prove no exception. Its downfall would not come during a dramatic naval battle. It would not be destroyed by overwhelming force from a rival fleet. Instead, the ship's fate would be decided in the shifting waters near the coast of what is now North Carolina, where geography, navigation, and perhaps intention combine to bring one of history's most famous pirate vessels to an abrupt end. Imagine the Atlantic world during the summer of 1718. Blackbeard stands at the height of his fame. The Charleston blockade has demonstrated the reach of his influence. Merchant captains recognize his name. Colonial officials monitor reports concerning his movements. Queen Anne's Revenge serves as the centerpiece of a successful pirate enterprise operating across a broad region. Yet success often creates new challenges. Large crews require support. Ships need maintenance. Political pressure increases as authorities become more determined to suppress piracy. Circumstances are changing. The period of relative freedom enjoyed by Blackbeard and many of his contemporaries is beginning to narrow. Imagine Queen Anne's Revenge sailing northward along the Atlantic coast after months of activity. The ship remains impressive. Its hull carries the marks of extensive service, yet it continues functioning effectively. Around it move other vessels associated with Blackbeard's fleet. Together they represent a mobile community shaped by shared experiences at sea. The atmosphere aboard may feel different from earlier months. Success has brought rewards, but it has also brought attention. Every famous pirate eventually faces questions about the future. Opportunities remain available, yet risks continue growing. Imagine the coastline of North Carolina appearing on the horizon. This region presents both opportunities and challenges for mariners. Its waters include shifting sandbars, narrow inlets, and complex tidal conditions. Experienced navigators understand the importance of local knowledge. Even under favorable circumstances, approaching unfamiliar coastal waters requires caution. Geography exerts tremendous influence over maritime history because natural features can prove as consequential as human actions. Imagine Beaufort Inlet during the early 18th century. The entrance to the waterway appears manageable from a distance, yet hidden beneath the surface lie hazards capable of trapping large vessels. Sandbars shift over time in response to currents, storms, and tides. Navigational information is often incomplete. Mariners must rely upon observation, experience, and judgment. Such conditions create uncertainty even for skilled sailors. Imagine Queen Anne's Revenge approaching these waters. Historical records indicate that in June of 1718, the Flagship ran aground near Beaufort Inlet. The exact sequence of events remains a subject of discussion among historians. Certain details are well documented. Others remain open to interpretation. What is clear is that one of the most powerful pirate vessels operating in the Atlantic suddenly found itself trapped by circumstances that could not be resolved easily. Imagine the moment of grounding. The ship moves forward under apparent control. Then something changes. The hull encounters resistance. Progress slows or stops entirely. Sailors immediately recognize the seriousness of the situation. Grounding can damage a vessel, expose it to environmental forces, and create logistical problems affecting everyone aboard. A ship designed for movement becomes immobilized. The transformation is immediate and unsettling. Imagine crew members responding to the emergency. Maritime training emphasizes adaptability because unexpected situations occur regularly. Orders are issued. Assessments are made. Efforts begin to determine the extent of the problem. Can the ship be freed? Has significant damage occurred? What options remain available? Such questions demand immediate attention. The routines of daily life aboard the Flagship give way to crisis management. Imagine the emotional atmosphere during these first hours. Queen Anne's Revenge had become synonymous with strength and capability. Its grounding, therefore, carries symbolic significance in addition to practical consequences. The floating fortress that influenced merchant behavior across the Atlantic now struggles against environmental conditions beyond its control. The sea has a way of reminding sailors that reputation alone cannot overcome geography. Imagine historians examining the event centuries later. One of the most intriguing questions concerns intention. Some scholars have suggested that Blackbeard may have deliberately grounded the ship as part of a broader strategy. Large pirate crews presented logistical challenges. Dividing resources among fewer people could increase individual shares. Other historians argue that the grounding resulted from navigational difficulties rather than deliberate action. Evidence allows multiple interpretations. The uncertainty adds another layer of fascination to the story. Imagine sailors aboard nearby vessels observing the situation. The sight must have been remarkable. Queen Anne's Revenge had achieved legendary status within maritime circles. Seeing the Flagship immobilized would have challenged assumptions about its invulnerability. Yet history often unfolds through such contrasts. Great reputations coexist with ordinary vulnerabilities. Powerful ships remain subject to natural forces. Imagine the tide moving around the stranded vessel. Hours pass. Conditions change. Efforts continue. Yet the reality becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Queen Anne's Revenge may not return to open water. The ship that had carried Blackbeard through the most successful period of his career now faces a future fundamentally different from the one anticipated only days earlier. Imagine standing upon the deck as realization spreads gradually among the crew. The flagship's career is approaching its end. Not through battle, not through conquest, but through an encounter with geography and circumstance. The floating fortress that once dominated Caribbean waters has reached the turning point from which there will be no return. And as the tides continue moving around the stranded hull, one of the most famous chapters in pirate history begins drawing toward its conclusion. As the reality of the grounding becomes increasingly clear and Queen Anne's Revenge remains trapped within the challenging waters near Beaufort Inlet, the consequences of the disaster begin unfolding across multiple levels at once. For the crew, the situation represents an immediate practical crisis requiring decisions about survival, resources, and future plans. For Blackbeard, it presents a strategic problem affecting the direction of his entire enterprise. And for historians looking back across centuries, the grounding marks one of the most significant turning points in the history of Atlantic piracy. The flagship that had helped elevate Blackbeard from a successful pirate captain into a legendary figure was now facing a future in which movement, its defining characteristic, might no longer be possible. Imagine the scene aboard Queen Anne's Revenge during the days following the grounding. Sailors continue assessing damage. Equipment is examined carefully. Discussions focus upon possibilities for freeing the vessel. Maritime history contains numerous examples of ships successfully refloated after running aground, particularly if conditions are favorable and assistance is available. Yet every grounding differs according to location, weather, tides, and the characteristics of the ship involved. Hope may remain, but uncertainty grows with each passing hour. Imagine the physical challenges confronting the crew. A large vessel trapped on a sandbar experiences stresses different from those encountered during ordinary sailing. Weight distribution changes. Movement caused by tides and waves can create additional strain. The ship that once responded confidently to wind and sail now sits largely at the mercy of external conditions. Sailors accustomed to action may find the experience particularly frustrating. Maritime culture values mobility. Grounding removes that mobility abruptly. Imagine Blackbeard evaluating his options. Successful pirate captains survive by adapting to changing circumstances. The loss of a flagship is serious, but it does not necessarily mean the end of a career. Other vessels remain available. Resources can be redistributed. Plans can be altered. The question becomes not whether the situation is difficult, but how best to respond. Historical accounts suggest that Blackbeard ultimately shifted his attention toward preserving people and resources rather than continuing attempts to save the ship. Imagine the transfer of supplies from the stranded flagship to other vessels. Food, equipment, weapons, and valuable goods become priorities. Maritime communities frequently engage in such efforts when ships encounter trouble. Salvage operations require organization and labor. Every item successfully removed represents something preserved from loss. The process is practical and urgent because conditions can deteriorate unexpectedly. Imagine the emotional experience of watching familiar surroundings gradually emptied. For many crew members, Queen Anne's Revenge had served as both workplace and home. They had crossed oceans aboard the vessel. They had participated in famous events under its sails. The ship's reputation had become part of their own identity. Leaving it behind would not have been a simple logistical adjustment. It represented the end of an important chapter in their lives. Imagine the ongoing historical debate surrounding Blackbeard's intentions. Some interpretations suggest that the grounding may have offered advantages from his perspective. Managing a very large pirate crew could create complications. Reducing numbers while concentrating resources among a smaller group might increase flexibility. If this interpretation is correct, the loss of Queen Anne's Revenge may have served broader strategic goals despite its immediate costs. Other historians remain unconvinced, emphasizing navigational hazards and environmental factors as more likely explanations. The evidence allows room for disagreement, ensuring that the mystery remains part of the story. Imagine the coastline surrounding Beaufort Inlet during this period. Sparse settlements and complex waterways create an environment where local knowledge matters enormously. Ships entering these waters must navigate conditions that are not always predictable. The grounding of Queen Anne's Revenge therefore reflects broader themes within maritime history. Geography influences events as profoundly as human ambition. Even the most successful captains operate within environments they cannot fully control. Imagine news of the disaster spreading through maritime networks. Sailors hear reports in distant ports. Merchants discuss developments affecting future voyages. Colonial officials receive information suggesting that one of the most powerful pirate vessels in the Atlantic has been lost. Reactions vary according to perspective. Some view the event as welcome news. Others see it as a remarkable turn of fortune. In every case, the grounding attracts attention because Queen Anne's Revenge had become so widely known. Imagine the stranded Flagship itself as time passes. The ship remains physically present, yet its role has changed completely. Once a symbol of mobility and power, it now serves as a reminder of impermanence. Maritime history contains many such moments. Great vessels rise to prominence and then disappear through accidents, storms, warfare, or simple decay. Queen Anne's Revenge joins this tradition. Its career proves relatively brief, yet its impact remains substantial. Imagine standing upon the deck one final time before departure becomes unavoidable. Around you lies a ship that helped shape one of the most famous pirate careers in history. The familiar rigging, decks, and equipment remain visible, yet their future is uncertain. The vessel will never again sail as Blackbeard's flagship. The realization carries symbolic weight. An era is ending. Imagine crew members boarding smaller vessels and preparing to leave. Supplies have been transferred. Decisions have been made. The process is practical, yet beneath the practical realities lies a deeper significance. Queen Anne's Revenge is being abandoned not because it lacks history, but because its history has reached a conclusion. The floating fortress can no longer fulfill the role for which it became famous. Imagine the ship remaining behind as the tide continues its endless movement. Wind passes through rigging that will never again carry the vessel across open water. Waves strike the hull gently. Nature begins the slow process of reclaiming what human effort once created. The flagship's active career has ended, but its story is far from over. Blackbeard himself still has a future ahead, though that future will prove surprisingly short. And beneath the waters of Beaufort Inlet, the remains of Queen Anne's Revenge will wait silently for centuries, preserving evidence of a remarkable life at sea and a legend that refuses to disappear. Part 8: The End of Blackbeard's Flagship. As the stranded remains of Queen Anne's Revenge settle into the waters near Beaufort Inlet and the realization spreads that the great flagship will not return to open sea, a new chapter begins in the story of Blackbeard himself. The loss of the vessel represents more than the destruction of a ship. It marks the beginning of the end for one of the most famous pirate careers in history. Throughout our journey, We have watched the transformation of a French commercial vessel into a floating fortress feared across the Atlantic. We have seen how Blackbeard used Queen Anne's revenge to build a reputation that extended far beyond the waters in which he sailed. Yet ships and captains often become inseparable in historical memory. When the flagship falls, the captain's fortunes frequently change as well. The months following the grounding would prove decisive not only for the ship but also for the man who commanded it. Imagine the days immediately after the abandonment of Queen Anne's revenge. Blackbeard remains an influential figure, yet the circumstances surrounding him are changing rapidly. Without his flagship, he no longer possesses the same degree of mobility, firepower, or symbolic authority. Other vessels remain under his control, but none carry the same weight within the imagination of sailors and merchants. Queen Anne's revenge had become an extension of Blackbeard's identity. Its size, reputation, and visibility reinforced his position throughout the Atlantic world. Losing the ship, therefore, creates practical and psychological consequences simultaneously. Imagine Blackbeard gathering surviving resources and crew members after the grounding. Decisions must be made quickly. Supplies have been salvaged where possible. Smaller vessels remain available. The immediate challenge is survival and adaptation. Maritime life rewards flexibility because circumstances often change without warning. Throughout history, successful sailors have learned to respond rather than simply react. Blackbeard appears to have understood this principle. Rather than allowing the loss of the flagship to end his career immediately, he begins reshaping his plans around the realities now confronting him. Imagine the atmosphere among the remaining crew. For many sailors, the grounding of Queen Anne's revenge must have felt almost unreal. The ship had dominated their lives. It had served as home, workplace, and symbol. They had crossed oceans beneath its sails and participated in events that would later become legendary. The vessel's destruction forces them to confront uncertainty. Pirate careers already involve risk. The loss of the flagship intensifies that uncertainty considerably. Imagine the broader Atlantic world observing these developments. News travels slowly by modern standards, yet maritime communities remain remarkably effective at exchanging information. Reports concerning Blackbeard's flagship spread from port to port. Merchants hear that Queen Anne's revenge has been lost. Colonial authorities receive encouraging updates suggesting that pirate power may be weakening. Sailors discuss conflicting rumors regarding what happened and why. Every retelling contributes to the ship's growing legend. Ironically, the loss of the vessel helps secure its place in historical memory. Imagine the political environment surrounding Blackbeard during this period. Colonial governments have become increasingly concerned about piracy. Economic interests demand protection. Merchants pressure authorities to take stronger action. The era that allowed pirates to operate with relative freedom is beginning to close. Governors throughout the region seek ways to restore order and demonstrate control over maritime routes. Blackbeard's fame makes him a particularly attractive target. Capturing or eliminating such a well-known figure would carry symbolic significance beyond any individual encounter. Imagine Blackbeard navigating these changing conditions. Without Queen Anne's revenge, he remains dangerous, experienced, and resourceful. Yet the loss of the flagship reduces his ability to project power on a large scale. The massive vessel had served as a floating headquarters capable of supporting extensive operations. Smaller ships offer advantages in speed and maneuverability, but they cannot replicate the influence associated with a famous flagship. The balance between opportunity and vulnerability is shifting steadily. Imagine the months following the grounding. Blackbeard continues operating in coastal waters, adapting to new realities. Yet the atmosphere surrounding his career feels different. The confidence associated with earlier successes now coexists with increasing pressure. Colonial authorities are paying closer attention. Resources are more limited. The protective aura once provided by Queen Anne's Revenge has disappeared. History often reveals such turning points only in retrospect. Participants experience gradual changes without always recognizing their long-term significance. Imagine sailors discussing Blackbeard in distant taverns during this period. Some continue describing him as an unstoppable pirate captain. Others note recent setbacks. Stories vary according to perspective and information. Reputation, once established, does not vanish immediately. Yet perceptions evolve. The absence of the flagship becomes part of the conversation. People who once spoke about Queen Anne's Revenge now speak about its loss. The narrative is changing. Imagine standing aboard one of Blackbeard's remaining vessels and looking toward the horizon. The sea remains familiar. Trade routes continue functioning. Opportunities still exist. Yet something important is missing. The floating fortress that once dominated these waters is gone. Its absence creates a void impossible to ignore. For Blackbeard, every decision now occurs within a different strategic environment. Imagine the symbolic relationship between captain and ship. Throughout maritime history, certain vessels become inseparable from the individuals who command them. The names evoke one another automatically. Queen Anne's Revenge and Blackbeard achieved precisely this connection. Losing the ship therefore represents more than material loss. It affects identity. The captain remains alive, but part of the legend has already ended. Imagine the broader lesson embedded within this moment. Maritime power often appears permanent while it lasts. Ships seem invincible until circumstances prove otherwise. Yet history repeatedly demonstrates the fragility of success. A hidden sandbar, an unexpected storm, or a single decision can alter trajectories dramatically. Queen Anne's Revenge had once seemed unstoppable. Now it rests abandoned beneath coastal waters. Blackbeard continues forward, but the path ahead is narrowing. And as colonial authorities prepare their response, the final act of his remarkable career is drawing closer with every passing day. As the months pass after the loss of Queen Anne's Revenge and Blackbeard attempts to navigate a world that is becoming increasingly hostile to piracy, the connection between the fate of the ship and the fate of its captain becomes impossible to ignore. The grounding near Beaufort Inlet had not ended Blackbeard's career immediately, but it had changed its trajectory in profound ways. The floating fortress that once projected power across the Atlantic was gone, and with its disappearance came a gradual erosion of the advantages that had helped make Blackbeard one of the most feared figures of his age. The story now moves toward its conclusion, not with the sudden collapse of a legend, but with a series of developments that reveal how quickly circumstances can change in the maritime world. Imagine the Atlantic coast during the latter half of 1718. Trade continues flowing through colonial ports. Merchant ships sail established routes. Governments seek greater control over maritime activity. Yet beneath this appearance of stability lies tension. Piracy remains a significant concern, and colonial authorities increasingly view decisive action as necessary. The era that had allowed figures like Blackbeard to flourish is beginning to close. Political priorities are shifting. Resources are being directed toward suppression efforts. The environment that once favored pirate enterprise is becoming less accommodating with each passing month. Imagine Blackbeard operating from smaller vessels after the loss of Queen Anne's Revenge. These ships still provide mobility and opportunities, yet they lack the symbolic impact of the flagship. A large, heavily armed vessel commands attention immediately. Smaller craft, however effective, do not generate the same psychological response. Reputation can compensate for this difference temporarily, but not indefinitely. Over time, the absence of the flagship alters how others perceive Blackbeard's position. The legend survives, yet the material foundation supporting it has weakened. Imagine colonial officials receiving reports about Blackbeard's movements. Intelligence gathering during this period depends upon sailors, merchants, local residents, and informal networks of communication. Information may be incomplete or delayed, but patterns eventually emerge. Authorities begin recognizing opportunities to act. The loss of Queen Anne's Revenge contributes to this process because it reduces Blackbeard's operational flexibility. A pirate captain without his most powerful ship becomes a more manageable target. Imagine the governor of Virginia, Alexander Spotswood, observing these developments with interest. Concerned about piracy and eager to demonstrate authority, he becomes increasingly determined to address the threat represented by Blackbeard. The political dimensions of the story now become more prominent. Pirates do not operate in isolation. Their actions influence trade, governance, and public perception. Consequently, responses to piracy often reflect broader political goals. Blackbeard's fame makes him a particularly valuable target from an administrative perspective. Imagine the growing sense of inevitability surrounding events. Historical outcomes rarely feel inevitable to participants at the time. Individuals continue making choices, adapting to circumstances, and pursuing opportunities. Yet, from a broader perspective, certain trends become visible. Blackbeard faces increasing pressure. Authorities possess stronger motivations. Resources are being mobilized. The space within which piracy can operate successfully is shrinking. The loss of Queen Anne's Revenge stands as one of the key developments accelerating this process. Imagine sailors hearing rumors of planned action against Blackbeard. Maritime communities thrive on information, speculation, and storytelling. News travels through conversations in ports and aboard ships. Some reports prove accurate. Others become exaggerated. Yet collectively they create an atmosphere of expectation. People sense that significant events may be approaching. Blackbeard remains famous, but fame attracts attention as well as admiration. Imagine November 1718 approaching. By this point, colonial authorities have organized a direct response. Lieutenant Robert Maynard receives orders to pursue Blackbeard. The mission reflects broader efforts to suppress piracy and restore confidence in maritime commerce. Had Queen Anne's Revenge still been operational, the encounter might have unfolded differently. The flagship's firepower and size could have altered calculations considerably. Yet that possibility no longer exists. The ship rests beneath coastal waters, absent from the final confrontation that will define Blackbeard's legacy. Imagine the encounter itself, which takes place near Ocracoke Island. Blackbeard commands a much smaller vessel than the one that had once carried him across the Atlantic as master of the floating fortress. The battle that follows becomes one of the most famous episodes in pirate history. Accounts describe intense fighting, confusion, courage, and determination on both sides. When the conflict ends, Blackbeard is dead. One of the most celebrated pirate careers of the age has come to a close. Imagine the symbolic significance of this outcome. Only months earlier, Blackbeard had commanded Queen Anne's Revenge, a ship capable of influencing entire regions through its presence alone. Now both captain and flagship are gone. The transformation is striking. Maritime history often compresses dramatic changes into surprisingly short periods. Great reputations may take years to build and only moments to collapse. Imagine news of Blackbeard's death spreading throughout the Atlantic world. Merchants welcome the development. Authorities present it as evidence of successful governance. Sailors exchange stories about the battle and the man who fought it. The legend begins evolving immediately. Historical figures frequently become larger than life after death because stories continue growing even when careers have ended. Blackbeard proves no exception. Imagine the relationship between memory and material evidence. Blackbeard's life ends in 1718. Queen Anne's revenge remains lost beneath the waters near Beaufort Inlet. Yet neither disappears completely. Stories preserve the captain's reputation. The wreck preserves traces of the ship. Together they create a legacy extending far beyond the brief period during which they dominated Atlantic waters. Imagine standing upon a quiet shoreline as waves move gently toward land. Somewhere beyond sight rests the wreck of Queen Anne's Revenge. The captain who commanded it is gone. The age that produced it is fading. Yet the story remains. The loss of the Flagship and the death of Blackbeard mark the end of one chapter in maritime history, but not the end of the legend itself. For centuries, people will continue wondering about the ship, the captain, and the remarkable career they shared. And beneath the waters of North Carolina, the remains of the floating fortress will wait patiently for a future generation to rediscover them and uncover the secrets they still hold. Part 9: Rediscovering Queen Anne's Revenge. As we arrive at the final segment of our journey and leave behind the dramatic events of 1718, the story of Queen Anne's Revenge enters a very different phase. The ship that once dominated Atlantic waters no longer sails beneath open skies. Blackbeard is gone. The Golden Age of Piracy is gradually fading into history. Yet the story does not end with the grounding at Beaufort Inlet or the death of the captain who made the vessel famous. Instead, it enters a long period of silence. For centuries, the remains of Queen Anne's Revenge rested beneath the waters off the coast of North Carolina, hidden beneath shifting sand, currents, and time itself, while stories about Blackbeard continued spreading through books, folklore, and popular culture. The actual ship seemed lost to history. Many famous vessels vanished completely, leaving behind only documents and memories. Queen Anne's Revenge appeared destined to share that fate. Yet history occasionally offers remarkable second chapters, and the rediscovery of the Flagship would become one of the most fascinating maritime archaeological stories ever told. Imagine the waters near Beaufort Inlet in the years immediately following the wreck. The abandoned vessel remains where it was left, gradually changing as natural processes begin their work. Storms move sediment across the seafloor. Wooden structures weaken. Marine organisms attach themselves to exposed surfaces. The transformation occurs slowly, almost invisibly. Decades pass, then generations. The world above changes dramatically while the remains of the ship rest quietly below. Empires rise and fall. Nations emerge. Technologies transform daily life. Yet beneath the water, traces of Queen Anne's Revenge endure. Imagine local communities living along the North Carolina coast during the 18th and 19th centuries. Stories about Blackbeard survive in regional memory. Fishermen, sailors, and residents occasionally discuss legends associated with the famous pirate. Certain locations become linked with folklore. Hidden treasures, ghost stories, and maritime mysteries become part of local tradition. Yet legends and archaeology are not the same thing. People know the stories, but the precise location of the wreck remains uncertain. The ship exists somewhere between history and myth. Imagine historians studying Blackbeard during the 19th and 20th centuries. Documents provide valuable information about his activities. Colonial records, letters, and official reports help reconstruct portions of the story. Yet important questions remain unanswered. What exactly happened to Queen Anne's Revenge after it grounded? How much of the vessel survived? Could the wreck still exist? Such questions become increasingly interesting as maritime archaeology develops into a more sophisticated discipline. Imagine the evolution of underwater exploration technology. Early generations possess limited ability to investigate submerged sites systematically. Over time, However, improvements in diving equipment, surveying techniques, and archaeological methods expand possibilities significantly. Locations once inaccessible become available for careful study. Maritime archaeologists begin examining shipwrecks not merely as curiosities but as valuable historical resources capable of providing insights unavailable through written records alone. Imagine researchers focusing attention on the waters surrounding Beaufort Inlet. Historical evidence suggests that Queen Anne's Revenge should be somewhere nearby. The challenge lies in identifying a specific wreck among numerous possibilities. Coastal waters often contain remains from multiple periods. Storms, navigation accidents, warfare, and ordinary maritime activity leave traces across centuries. Finding a particular ship requires patience, expertise, and considerable investigation. Imagine the excitement surrounding discoveries made during the 1990s. Archaeological investigations reveal evidence strongly suggesting that a wreck located near Beaufort Inlet is indeed Queen Anne's Revenge. The announcement attracts international attention. Historians, archaeologists, and members of the public recognize the significance immediately. One of the most famous pirate ships in history may have been found after nearly 3 centuries beneath the sea. Imagine divers descending toward the wreck site. Visibility varies according to conditions. Sediment covers portions of the remains. Yet recognizable features begin emerging. Artifacts appear. Structural elements become visible. Each discovery contributes additional evidence supporting identification. Maritime archaeology often resembles detective work. Researchers assemble information gradually, comparing physical findings with historical records. Confidence grows as multiple lines of evidence converge. Imagine the emotional experience of encountering artifacts connected directly to Blackbeard's flagship. Objects that once served practical purposes aboard Queen Anne's Revenge now function as historical evidence. Cannons, tools, navigational equipment, and other materials offer tangible connections to the past. Unlike stories or illustrations, these items existed physically within the world we have been exploring throughout this documentary. They transform abstract history into something concrete and immediate. Imagine the importance of context in archaeological research. Individual artifacts possess value, yet their significance increases when studied within broader patterns. Where objects are found matters. How they relate to one another matters. Archaeologists therefore proceed carefully, documenting discoveries meticulously. The goal extends beyond recovering interesting items. Researchers seek understanding. Every artifact contributes to larger questions about life aboard the ship, maritime technology, and the world of Atlantic piracy. Imagine the wreck site itself as a time capsule. Not a perfectly preserved one, certainly, because centuries underwater inevitably alter materials. Yet enough survives to provide extraordinary insights. The remains preserve information unavailable elsewhere. Written records often emphasize major events and important individuals. Archaeological evidence frequently reveals details about everyday life. Together, these sources create richer understandings than either could provide alone. Imagine historians comparing archaeological findings with documentary evidence. Certain details confirm existing knowledge. Others raise new questions. This interaction between physical evidence and historical records lies at the heart of modern scholarship. Queen Anne's Revenge becomes not merely a legend but an active subject of research. The ship continues contributing to historical understanding centuries after its career ended. Imagine standing on the shoreline near Beaufort Inlet today. The waters appear calm. Boats move across the surface. Coastal life continues much as it has for generations. Yet beneath those waters rests evidence of one of the most famous pirate ships ever to sail the Atlantic. The rediscovery of Queen Anne's Revenge demonstrates that history is not fixed permanently in the past. New evidence can emerge, new questions can be asked, and stories that seem complete can acquire remarkable new chapters. After centuries of silence, the floating fortress has begun speaking once more through the artifacts and evidence preserved beneath the sea. As archaeological investigations continue and the remains of Queen Anne's Revenge gradually reveal more of their story, we begin to understand why the rediscovery of the ship represents far more than the recovery of a famous wreck. It provides a rare opportunity to connect legend with evidence, folklore with archaeology, and imagination with documented history. Throughout the centuries following Blackbeard's death, stories about the pirate and his flagship grew steadily. Some accounts remained close to historical events. Others became exaggerated through retelling. Popular culture added additional layers of mystery and romance. By the late 20th century, Blackbeard occupied a unique position within public imagination. He was simultaneously a historical figure and a legendary character. The rediscovery of Queen Anne's Revenge offered something extraordinary, a chance to examine physical evidence connected directly to the world behind the legend. Imagine archaeologists working carefully at the wreck site season after season. Maritime archaeology requires patience because underwater environments present unique challenges. Sediment shifts. Weather conditions influence access. Artifacts must be recovered, conserved, and studied according to rigorous standards. Progress often occurs gradually rather than dramatically. Yet over time, the accumulated results become remarkable. Thousands of artifacts emerge from the site, each contributing a small piece to a much larger puzzle. Imagine the variety of objects recovered from the wreck. Cannons reveal information about armament and defensive capabilities. Tools illustrate practical aspects of shipboard life. Fragments of equipment shed light on navigation, maintenance, and daily routines. Some artifacts relate directly to maritime operations. Others reflect the ordinary needs of the people who lived aboard the vessel. Together they transform Queen Anne's Revenge from a symbol into a community. The ship becomes populated once more through evidence left behind by those who sailed it. Imagine the cannons resting beneath the sea for nearly 300 years before returning to daylight. These weapons once contributed to the intimidating reputation of the floating fortress. Merchant captains who saw them arrayed along the decks understood their significance immediately. Today, archaeologists study them for different reasons. They provide information about manufacturing techniques, trade networks, and the practical realities of early 18th century maritime warfare. The same objects acquire new meanings depending upon historical context. Imagine conservation specialists working to preserve recovered artifacts. Objects submerged for centuries often require extensive treatment before they can be displayed or studied safely. Salt, corrosion, and environmental changes create complex challenges. Conservation, therefore, becomes an essential part of the archaeological process. Without it, valuable evidence might deteriorate rapidly after recovery. The effort invested in preservation reflects a broader commitment to understanding the past responsibly. Imagine museum visitors encountering artifacts from Queen Anne's Revenge. Many arrive familiar with Blackbeard's legend. Seeing actual objects connected to the flagship creates a different experience. History feels more immediate. The distance between past and present seems smaller. Artifacts possess a unique ability to bridge centuries because they are physical survivors. They occupied the same world as the people we study. They traveled aboard the same ship. They witnessed the same events. Imagine the broader significance of the wreck for maritime archaeology. Famous shipwrecks often attract public attention, yet their importance extends beyond popularity. Queen Anne's Revenge provides researchers with valuable information about piracy, trade, ship construction, and Atlantic history. Every discovery contributes to larger scholarly conversations. The wreck, therefore, serves educational purposes reaching far beyond the story of Blackbeard alone. Imagine how archaeological evidence sometimes challenges assumptions. Popular images of piracy often emphasize adventure and spectacle. Material evidence frequently highlights practical realities. Tools, equipment, and maintenance items remind us that ships required constant labor. Daily life involved work, organization, and adaptation. Queen Anne's Revenge becomes more interesting, not less, when viewed through this broader lens. Archaeology reveals complexity hidden behind legend. Imagine the relationship between myth and history. Many people assume these categories exist in opposition. Yet the story of Queen Anne's Revenge demonstrates a more nuanced reality. Legends often preserve genuine historical memories even when details become altered through retelling. Archaeological discoveries help identify where folklore and evidence intersect. The Flagship remains legendary, but it is also demonstrably real. Its artifacts provide tangible proof of experiences once known primarily through stories. Imagine standing beside a recovered cannon displayed in a museum. The object appears silent, yet it carries remarkable historical weight. It once formed part of Blackbeard's floating fortress. It survived the grounding at Beaufort Inlet. It rested beneath the sea while generations passed above. Now it contributes to education and research. Such journeys remind us that objects can possess histories nearly as fascinating as the people who used them. Imagine the legacy of Queen Anne's Revenge today. The ship exists simultaneously in multiple forms. It survives as an archaeological site. It survives in museum collections. It survives in historical scholarship. It survives in popular imagination. Few vessels achieve such diverse forms of remembrance. The floating fortress has become more than a pirate ship. It has become a cultural landmark connecting maritime history, archaeology, and storytelling. Imagine one final view of the waters near Beaufort Inlet as evening settles across the coast. Beneath the surface rest the remains of a ship that once influenced the Atlantic world. Above the surface, researchers continue learning from the evidence it preserved. The centuries-long silence has ended. Queen Anne's Revenge speaks again through artifacts, discoveries, and new understandings. Its active career lasted only a short time, yet its legacy continues expanding. The ship that once carried Blackbeard across the sea now carries knowledge across generations. And perhaps that is the most remarkable transformation of all. The floating fortress that once inspired fear now inspires curiosity, ensuring that its story will continue sailing through history long after the last traces of its wooden hull have disappeared into the tides of time. And so, as the sun slowly disappears beyond the horizon and the waters of the Atlantic grow quiet once more, our journey aboard Queen Anne's Revenge comes to an end. Tonight, we followed the remarkable life of one of the most famous ships in maritime history. We began in the shipyards of France, where an ordinary vessel was built for commerce and long-distance trade. We explored its early years crossing the Atlantic and the world that shaped its first voyages. We witnessed the moment it was captured by the pirate captain who would forever change its destiny. And we watched as Blackbeard transformed that captured vessel into Queen Anne's Revenge, a floating fortress whose reputation spread across oceans. Together, we sailed through the Golden Age of Piracy. We explored life aboard the ship. We followed its rise to power throughout the Caribbean. And we saw how its name became known in ports hundreds of miles apart, inspiring fear, fascination, and countless stories. Yet, as history so often reminds us, even the most powerful ships are temporary. A hidden sandbar, a changing tide, a single moment of misfortune, These small forces can alter the course of history just as surely as great battles or famous leaders. The mighty Queen Anne's Revenge did not disappear in a glorious naval battle. It did not sink beneath the weight of enemy cannon fire. Instead, it met its end quietly along the coast of North Carolina, where the sea slowly reclaimed the vessel that had once dominated Atlantic waters. Blackbeard himself would not survive much longer. Within months, the man and the ship that had become inseparable in legend were both gone. But their story did not end there. For centuries, memories of Blackbeard and his floating fortress survived in maritime folklore. Sailors repeated the stories. Writers recorded the legends. Generations imagined the ship sailing once more across distant horizons. And then, nearly 300 years later, the sea returned a part of what it had hidden. The discovery of Queen Anne's Revenge allowed historians and archaeologists to reconnect legend with reality. Artifacts resting beneath the water confirmed that the famous Flagship was more than a story. It was a real ship, a real vessel that sailed through a real world shaped by trade, conflict, ambition, and adventure. Perhaps that is why Queen Anne's Revenge continues to fascinate us today. Not because it was the largest ship, not because it sailed the longest, but because its story captures something timeless about the relationship between history and legend. It reminds us that behind every great myth lies a real human story waiting to be discovered, and that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with an ordinary ship. If you enjoyed tonight's voyage into the Golden Age of Piracy and the fascinating history of Blackbeard's famous Flagship, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue creating long-form history for sleep documentaries exploring forgotten ships, lost civilizations, mysterious discoveries, legendary voyages, and the remarkable stories hidden within history. There are still countless mysteries waiting beyond the horizon. More shipwrecks resting beneath the sea, more forgotten explorers, more ancient worlds, and many more stories waiting to be uncovered. For now, imagine gentle waves rolling across the Atlantic beneath a moonlit sky. Imagine a calm breeze moving across the water, and somewhere beneath those quiet waters, the remains of Queen Anne's Revenge resting peacefully where it has slept for centuries. Its voyage completed, its legend enduring, its story carried forward by history itself. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Good night, sleep well, and may calm seas, favorable winds, and peaceful dreams guide you safely home.